All right, so if you're like me, your data does not come out perfect every single time. Sometimes we do have to work some problems within our images, and today we're going to do that, but we're also going to be looking at some new tools and some new workflows that you yourself might be able to start integrating into your data. So stick around as we look at my data from a RC8 that is reduced by 0.7 with an astrophysics reducer, and we're going to be looking at the Boogeyman Nebula. Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. I am of course Mark Carter with Midwest Astro, and today we're going to be looking at data that both is not clean, but some tools that can help clean us up. And they're new tools. One of them in particular is going to be Russell Crowe's new Blur Exterminator. Now I've had a lot of questions about this and my experience with it, and so far I find that this works best on images that have already been processed. Now some people are doing workflows where they're running Blur Exterminator on their data before they actually combine, say, their RGB with their luminance, and that's totally fine. It's really whatever works for you. But so I personally run Blur Exterminator with two conditions. I'm at a long focal length and I'm done processing my image. I've done everything already up to that point. We're going to show you that workflow here today. So why do I say long focal lengths? I have run Blur Exterminator on a number of images. For my Explorer Scientific 127, that's reduced by 0.7, so that gives me 666 millimeters of focal length, and I can hardly see any benefits other than smaller stars. The data itself doesn't really seem to get sharpened, and I have done some images from scratch where I've run it trying to clean up my luminance data or even my hydrogen data before I use it as a luminance layer. But I do find that it works better when you're probably over 1,000 millimeters of focal length, depending upon your skies, of course. But those are the conditions that I found that it helps my images. So today, instead of just making speculations and claims, let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. Maybe you'll pick up some new workflows that you can integrate into your own processing techniques. Now, by no means am I the best at what I do, but I make it work for me. So I'm not going to tell you that this is the only way to do it, but what I am going to tell you is it works for me. So with that, let's get started. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to run, and you'll have to forgive me, when I do these YouTube videos, I have to kill my resolution on my giant 40-inch monitor here down to a measly 1920 by 1080, which makes my screen massive. But it's so you guys can see what I'm actually doing, because if I leave it in full resolution, it's almost impossible for you to see the little button. So with that, let's go ahead. We used screen transfer function. I deselected the chain link because when you do that, you don't always get a good stretch. And then I click the auto stretch. I click the little radiation looking button, and that's what gives me that stretch. On your keyboard, you can press F12 to kill that stretch. But let's put the stretch back on, because now I'm going to do the next step here, which is to kind of clean up our image. And as you can see, we don't have spectacular data out of the gates. Now, a lot of these professionals, they have probably beautiful images before they even start processing. So we're going to be working some issues today with gradients, with some stray light that is entered in, right? Because I'm in a Bortle 5, so it's dark, but it's not perfect, and you do sometimes see that with these colored images. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to process, and then we're going to find dynamic, all processes, dynamic crop. Open that up. We're going to click down here. This will reset our image, and then we're going to pull our lines until we kind of get where we only have good data to work with. So I'm going to pull that. Now I do know, let's see, I do know that sometimes this can be confusing to some people, but all I'm trying to do is build a box around the image that I want to process. Now, This image with a screen transfer function stretch is a bit overstretched. So where you see all this black, it's not actually black, but there is inconsistent data with, say, the rest of that image. So I do like to crop that in just a little. Okay, so we have the framework with which we want to work with. Let's just drag this down here so I can apply that exact same crop on every image. And again, it's just this little tab, click it, drag it, it'll create a new instance. And that's where you see down here, we're process 9, and we can actually name this dyne crop. And the way I did it is right here, there's a little in key. You just click that to rename it. So we'll leave it as dynamic crop. And what I can do is close this and show you that it saves exactly what I just set up. So I'm going to minimize this image and run it on all subsequent images here real fast. Okay, so we have that all done. I'm going to click the in key on all of these and I'm going to rename it. I'm going to go B for blue, rename, G for green, H for hydrogen, L for luminance, and R for red, because I find it's just way easier down the line if I have these named with just a single letter, and when I want to do my combines, I don't have to type a whole bunch of unnecessary stuff. I am a bit OCD. I do like to stack them like blocks and put them all together just so PixInsight can ruin my stack once it gets up here. Okay, so we have that. So let's go ahead and integrate a couple of these things with channel combination. So we renamed it really easy. So we're going to go R, G, and B. Whoop. And we'll click the little circle button here. And now what we've done is we've built our RGB image. And then I hate that I have to do this every time, but we'll do that. So screen transfer function, we're going to click the radiation button. I am going to come over here. I'm going to double click where it says image 06, and I'm going to call this RGB1. Okay. So you can see our image, it's not clean, right? I mean, it doesn't look all that spectacular. Now, for the sake of this, you can do this next bit one of two ways. The first way is you can go to process, background modelization, and then dynamic background extraction. This works wonderful, but it's very tedious and manually time consuming. So I'm not going to do it on this particular image. I do recommend you figure out which one works best. Sometimes when you're doing galaxies, it's just easier to go to automatic background extractor, or if you have images that have a ton of nebulosity and you don't really have a defined background, which in this case, I'm not really sure where the background is, only because when you look at this image, there's a lot of red here, but there's also some orange over here. So I'm not really sure where I want to put those points at. Now, I'm not going to get into the manual portion of it. That's actually in some other videos that I've done, so please check those out with processing of those images. I'll try to put a link up here to pop up at the top. So we are going to just run automatic background extractor. I'm going to click down here where it says target image correction to expand that. I'm going to first run division. I'm going to click, hold, drag, and drop. I'm not going to do anything except for go ahead and change this to subtraction. Once again, click, hold, drag, and drop with the little triangle down here. Now, I'm going to do this exact same process on my hydrogen data, so I'm going to flip it back to division. And the reason why I'm doing this again is because I need my hydrogen separated from my RGB data, which is also going to be separated from my luminance data. And I'm going to have 3 images that I'm going to work with, and later on I'm going to decide, do I want to use that luminance data at all? Sometimes with nebulosity like this, you may not even use your you may not even use your luminance data. But I like to go ahead and build them all out now. That way, if I get down the road and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need the luminance data, I don't have to start over and do it again. So I'm going to do it all at the same time. So we're going to go ahead and pull that over. Drag and drop. Same thing. Subtraction. Drag and drop. And I need to run subtraction on this one. Okay. So again, if you're like me, your data is not perfect to begin with. But we do have some good data in here. Now, I am going to go to screen transfer function. I'm going to reapply a stretch here so it gives me an idea of what I'm working with. And I'm going to say maybe this area here is probably good background. What I'm going to do now is on my keyboard, I'm going to press Alt N. That way I can draw a preview box. And I'm going to zoom back out. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is go background neutralization. Now, reminder, you can only use this on colored images. So I can't use this on my hydrogen or luminance images. I can only run it here on my RGB image. I'm going to pick my preview, say OK, and click, hold, drag and drop. The image goes black, but that's fine. Don't worry about it. Open up the next one, which is going to be color calibration. Once again, you can only run this on colored images. So I'm going to go here and click my preview and say OK. So again, RGB1 preview, and we're only setting the background reference. I'm not changing anything else. The target image is going to be the one in which I click, hold, drag, and drop. All right, so now let's open up screen transfer function again. Now you might be able to just leave this open on the side. I would encourage you to do that. Again, my window is significantly smaller than what I'm used to working with, so I do need to minimize it for my space. So I'm gonna click the radiation button, and now you can see a little bit of our nebulosity. And it actually looks relatively decent. It's incredibly noisy. It's not perfect, but with this particular image, again, my target is for hydrogen RGB. So we're going to put more emphasis on our hydrogen data than we are the RGB data. And the reason is because I only truly care about my RGB stars. So we're going to leave those there. And we're going to call this image good for right now. We're going to open up our luminance and hydrogen data. Now, if you look closely here, you can see where my flats didn't really get rid of the off-axis scatter well right here and up along the border and over here. So again, you might have artifacts in your images, and I'm going to remove that later down the road. So for right now, what I'm going to do is open up Russell Crowe's Noise Exterminator. Now, if you're hesitant about buying this tool or any of his tools, let me show you what amazing work this does. Let's open up this RGB image. Let's zoom in here. You see all these megapixels of green primarily, and there's some blue and a little bit of magenta in there. That's incredibly noisy though, and you can see it in the whole image, but as soon as I click, hold, drag, and drop, here in just a couple of seconds, it's going to clean this image up and almost present me an image that looks like I might have 20 hours or better integrated in here, when in fact I might only have 2 or 3 hours. So here's before and after, before and after, and just look at the star. Watch the star, right? Like the star stays perfectly intact, but all the pixels around it really do clean up well. So highly encourage you to use it. It's not perfect, but it does work spectacularly. It is hands down, from my experience, the best form of noise reduction. A lot of people will use Topaz denoise for their denoising, but honestly, this works way better, hands down. So we applied our noise reduction on our RGB. Same thing. I mean, look how noisy it is. Very pixelated, but as soon as we drag that on top, and it runs relatively quick, of course, depending on your computer, but you can see, look at the background. Before and after, before and after. It really does get you pretty close to having the equivalent of spectacular data. So if you're on the fence about this one, please don't be on the fence anymore. Go ahead and get it. Your images will do nothing but benefit from it. Same thing here. I guess this isn't as noisy, but it shows you how much more clean it gets. So when we look at this image, one thing that really stands out is this corner. So this corner, we will have to clean that up, because my goal is to never add data that doesn't exist, but it is to try to clean up what doesn't actually exist in space. So in this particular case, it could be a cloud was captured in an image, or stray light, some combination of something came into the telescope and flooded this corner with some light. So we will clean that up. And again, it's not because I'm altering my image or anything crazy. It's just to try to preserve the details that I do have within this nebulosity. So with this image, what I'm going to do really quick here is I want to see it flipped upside down like that. Yeah. So let's do that on all of our images by going to Image, Geometry, Rotate. Yeah, that's fine. We'll lose the preview because we don't need it anymore. We'll minimize it, And let me double check. Yeah, our luminance data also needs to be image, geometry, rotate 180. You do have to make sure if you do it on this, you do it on all of them. And I recommend you do it sooner rather than later, because if you pull out your stars, you'll have to remember to do those as well. And it's just a lot to remember when you already have a lot of things going on. So we have 3 images that we're working with right here. What I'm gonna do to make it easier on myself and pull these 3 out. Okay, so let's start with our RGB image. So we've run Noise Exterminator. Now the next thing in my particular workflow is to stretch it. Now, I have been messing with GHS, or if we go to Script, Utilities, Generalized Hyperbolic Stretch. Okay, so for me to actually demonstrate the Generalized Hyperbolic Stretch with you guys, I did have to make my screen significantly bigger on my end to be able to see the options at the bottom. Now what you can't actually see on your screen here is just below this one, there's the tab, the triangle button, and then the apply green check mark, and then the red X and the reset buttons. So I don't know if I can even demonstrate those on the screen. You can just start to see it there when I pull it up, and right here down in the bottom corner here is going to be that the reset button. Just over here below the high point is the apply button, and then over here is just you can click, hold, drag and drop, but we're not going to do that. So let's just take a real quick look at this hyperbolic stretch, and what we're going to start with is our RGB image, and then it's going to say the selected select view screen has a screen transfer applied. Do you want to remove this? We're going to say yes. So once you have Generalized Hyperbolic Stretch open, we select our image. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to boost this stretch factor, and I'm going to boost it about here, and that's not going to be enough. So let's boost it maybe up to about 5.5. Still not quite enough. Let's try 6. Okay, perfect. So I'm starting to see some of the details within the nebulosity here. So what I'm gonna do is click, hold, and drag, and I'm gonna create a box. And then if you click anywhere on the screen, doesn't matter where, you can see that box pops up. Now, I know there's some nebulosity right about here. You can tell usually with your images that have a bit more detail. See how it's 6.4 right here? The more background you're in, the lower that number should be. Once you start to hit some data, it should bump up a little bit. It's not substantial, but it is a little. The next thing I'm gonna do is say send value to SP, which we can see right here. The symmetry point SP is now 0.00071. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say reset form, and I'm gonna click and drag, just so I can see a good amount of the details of both the background and the nebulosity. I'm going to come back here to the stretch factor, and I'm going to try to boost that a little bit and see what we can get to happen. Okay, so that's probably okay. One thing that I found with this particular tool is it really boosts your stars in a way that I don't like it. So we are going to see if we can't boost just the nebulosity. We're going to pull this back a little bit. That should be okay. So let's just try that. Let's hit the check mark, and you can see it applied it on the image. It's the same thing as the histogram stretch, and we might still have to do a histogram stretch. We'll just kind of see how this plays out. I am still learning this tool, but this is basically how you use it. So same thing, we're gonna zoom in by clicking and dragging, and we can see some of the clouds right in here and right in here. So I'm gonna select maybe this darker area here, and you can see it's a much larger value now. And let's say send to SP. Let's reset our image, and let's watch the whole image here. And I do apologize if this is harder to see, since I did have to make my resolution higher on my computer, so I'd be able to use this tool and show you. So that's probably decent around there. Let's see what happens. You can see when we zoom in here with our histogram, it shows you where you're at currently right here and where you are going to go. So if we boost this, you'll see it slides to the right, just like it does in the histogram tool itself. right? And you can really blow it out, right? Like that's way too much. Or we can pull it back to reality here, and it actually looks kind of cool. Let's see here. That's kind of neat right there. Let's see if we do this. It's going to lighten up the background. I don't really want to do that too much, but I do want to add a little bit. Let's see if we can pull this back just slightly to dim it down. So I do find this local stretch intensity B, if you pull it back, it does help kind of slide your data back a little bit from being blown out. So I do use the stretch factor and the local stretch intensity together, and just keep an eye on your stars, right? If you're just not sure what they're doing, you can always redraw and zoom in, and then you can say reset to then show you this screen again, so you can keep an eye on it. So I kind of like that. Let's do that, but I'm going to click this color stretch as well. And let's see if we can't get some of that color back in there. And I'm just boosting this to see what actually is going to happen for us here. So let's leave it at maybe 5.6 for my sake, and let's say apply. And now let's kill that and take a peek at what we got. Okay, so it is a little lacking in color, but that's where now we can say saturation, and we can reset it. That way we can see here what we got. And let's go down to the stretch factor and see what we do with saturation. Whoa. Saturation. There we go. Now we can start to saturate the image a bit and get some of that color back in there. Now you don't want to do too much saturation because some people they go crazy with this. But let's take a look at our stars. Our stars are our biggest indicator of if we're really doing it too much. And our stars still look pretty decent. I'm actually okay with this. So let's say check mark, and that's going to apply that stretch to it. That looks fairly decent. I don't know if I'm going to do too much more. Let's reset it. Let me drag this back up so you can try to see as much as possible. Okay, so let's zoom in a little bit here. And we can see this is some of our nebulosity here. Oh, sorry. This is very sensitive. If you click at all and hold the mouse and move just a tiny bit, it will create a zoom where I just want to click once, let go, and let's look at maybe some of our darker stuff here in this nebulosity here. How about that? Okay, so again, we've set our point. We're gonna say send value to SP, and now we're gonna back this up. Now I do want to still stay zoomed in. I just don't want to stay zoomed in that far, so I'm gonna create a bigger box, and let's see what happens. I'm gonna pull the RGB just slightly. See, our stars start to kind of get wonky on us, so I'm gonna be careful here. Pull that out. I'm gonna back this down, and I don't think I need to lighten the background up at all. This right here, the shadow prop point, will help. If I max it all the way out, for example, it'll kind of keep the whole image light, kind of matching your background with your data a little bit more. So I'm gonna pull this up just a little bit, not much. I'm gonna go ahead and say apply, and I'm gonna say reset my image. Okay, so that's probably okay for now. You can see our image needs a lot of work, but it's a good starting point. I do think it's maybe a little oversaturated, but we'll come back to it. When I do use the generalized hyperbolic stretch with a monochrome hydrogen or luminance layer, I do find it works so much easier if you just go into histogram transformation to start with. And we'll go ahead and do a preview. And go ahead and just get a basic stretch. There we go. Let's do that. And let's pull it to here and here. There we go. So start out with your initial histogram stretch and then go in and go back to your generalized hyperbolic stretch. And the reason why is because I cannot figure out how to get it to easily and accurately stretch my data without just blowing out that whole image like you just saw it do. So we're on the hydrogen data. You can start to see some of our details right there, so I don't have to do as much of a stretch here. Perfect. So now we can zoom in again. We can click to add a box, and we can go to some of our fainter details, which I'm gonna put it right here. But remember, I gotta make this box a little smaller so it doesn't hit any of the stars nearby. So this is probably good right about here. So I'm gonna say send to SP. And then I'm gonna say reset our image, zoom back out and make a big box here. And now I'm going to stretch my hydrogen data. I'm gonna look at the whole thing again. And I do want to keep the background from being blown out. So we'll add a little bit. We'll click the check mark. We'll apply that and we'll reset. Same thing. I'm going to click, put my box maybe right here. Send to SP, and let's do another little bit of a stretch here. And you can see that data is looking really, really good right there around the edges. But it's keeping our background in check. Now, I did mention this corner up here is going to be problematic later down the road, but I do kind of like where that's at. Let's make sure we don't overdo it. That's probably good right there. We apply it and reset. And we'll do it once more. Send to SP. Now you can see that's obviously too far. So that's probably pretty good right there. Let's shift back just a little bit and boost our black point. Maybe too much. Should be good, and we'll apply that. Okay, so our hydrogen image is done. Okay, so we have all three stretched. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to next remove the stars. Another item, Russell Croman's Star Exterminator. So we want to generate, and we'll drag and drop it. I'll skip ahead and we'll be right back. All right, so it did it with our hydrogen. We're going to minimize our hydrogen image. We'll minimize our H stars. We'll put those over here, and we're going to do the same thing with our luminance now, and we'll be right back. And our luminance now is done, so let's minimize that image, our L stars. Put it up here, minimize our luminance, and once again, we're going to drag that onto our RGB, and we'll be right back. All right, so we have our RGB images here. Let's minimize our Star Exterminator. All right, let's minimize our RGB stars, and you can see this one's tough. We're gonna have to work this a bit. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm now gonna transfer all of my images over to Photoshop. So I'm gonna save them and we'll hop over there in just a second. Okay, so we're back here. We're now inside of Photoshop. The first thing I'm gonna do is do Control J on the keyboard. It's gonna make a duplicate layer over here for me. And then I'm gonna come up here to my filter because I do use Pro Digital Software's Astro Flat Pro. And we're gonna run it. Now, this is incredibly noisy, but it's okay for right now. Again, we're going to be using so much hydrogen inside of this image. I'm not too concerned with its general appearance. You can go Control L and maybe lighten it up a little bit, or excuse me, darken it up a little bit by pulling this down just a little. That'll help with some of that noise. Not substantial, but before and after already you can see much more of the structure. So I'm gonna say flatten image by right clicking and flattening it. The next thing I want to do is I want to get rid of this corner. Now, again, I'm not trying to eliminate data. I'm trying to preserve the data that I do have. This is not data. This is basically washout. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to say select color range. And I'm going to click over here. And I'm going to do a few samples. I'm going to leave it on this one. You can click the plus, but the problem is if you click a sample, see how you can load up the whole image really quickly? We only want to get the sample that gives us the most of that corner without doing too much of the rest of the image. I just had a pretty good sample. That's maybe pretty good because I'm going to remove that. So let's call that okay. We're going to say okay. Now you can see the dancing ants. That's what we want to get rid of. So over here on the side, you can make a rectangular marquee tool. What you want to do is press and hold the Alt key and then draw your box of the dancing ants you don't want and then just let go. Right? So Alt, click, hold, drag, and then just let go of your mouse. You just keep holding Alt until you're done. So hold Alt, drag your box, and that's fine. Because all I want are my dancing ants over here. I'm even going to get rid of that one. So now that I've got them over here, I'm going to go back to select and mask. That way I can work just this corner. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to feather. I want to smooth it out. I don't want it to be all pixelated. See the difference? When you start to drag this, it starts to flatten that out a little bit. So maybe go over here. That's good. Now let's shift our edges to kind of compensate, because when you feather, it basically pulls it down, but you still have this little sliver of data that you still want to be reduced. So we do the shift edge by increasing it, and it'll shift that edge back kind of up here, and it'll fade gently and softly into your image as opposed to like one hard gradient line. So we're going to do that. We're also going to feather just a little bit more, smooth it out as much as we can. But when we do that, we need to boost our edge just a little, and we're going to say okay. So it doesn't look like much, but what we're going to do is go Control M to bring up our curves. Let's move this so we can watch it. So what colors make purple? Well, let's start with some blue. Let's reduce our blue. That might be okay. Let's maybe reduce our red and see what happens. And then our green. I'm seeing some green in there. Just a little. And then let's go to Control L and let's... So the first thing I want to do with those curves is kind of pull some of that color out of it. And now what I want to try to do is play with my sliders here to darken it to match the surrounding area. And that looks pretty close. Pretty close, huh? I mean, we literally went from this to this, and you can see we did nothing to modify our data. It gets rid of that brightness that flooded my camera at some point, and I don't know what caused it, otherwise I'd get rid of it. But you can see we get rid of the brightness of it because it doesn't help the image and it looks bad. We even have some up here, but it's not enough for me to right now think that I need to do anything about it. So again, not a beautiful image here because again, our data is going to be within our hydrogen because we're doing an HA RGB image. So I'm going to call this good for now. I'm going to say file, save as, and then we'll come back and do the next images. Okay. So now I'm going to go to my luminance. Same thing, Control J. And this is payware, by the way, this Pro Digital software, but the Astro Flat Pro is worth it. Absolutely worth it. So I told you earlier, my flats didn't properly get rid of the line down here at the bottom. This is my off-axis guider, the very bottom of the mirror in the frame. You can kind of see the frame here, and then the mirror is this perfectly flat line with the additional portion of the frame here. You know, it's the bars that hold the piece of glass, the prism itself. That's what you're seeing. My flats, for whatever reason, didn't get them out, and I changed my orientation before I could get proper flats to correct that. But For right now, we're gonna leave this exactly as is, and here's the reason. I have a really strong feeling we're not gonna be using this luminance data, so I'm not gonna invest a ton of time into it right now. I told you before, I wanted to process it at the same time in case I decided I wanted it, but if you look at this image, we just don't have a lot of defining details in it. I probably need way more data. That transfers my focus to this image here. Look how much data we have here compared to here, right? It's substantially more and it's way cleaner. So at this point, I'm going to transition our HA LRGB image into just an HA RGB image. And I'll show you later where we could have put this in to get that luminance layer. But for now, let's go ahead and just move over here to our hydrogen data. Same thing. Control J to give us a new layer over on the bottom right hand side of the screen. We're going to go to Filter, Pro Digital Software, and again we're going to run the flat. Now you can play with these sliders and you can see what they're actually trying to clean up, the smoothness, right? Like that looks weird. If you get to the point where like I like the initial settings more, just come right up here and go to Default Settings, and then go to initial settings and it'll reset where you were at. I'm sure there's another way to do it, but I know that that works. Okay, so I'm okay with that. I don't mind that at all. But I told you before, we're gonna have a problem. We have this upper left-hand corner of the screen. Now, the rest of the data looks perfectly fine. I'm happy with what I'm seeing, but we're gonna have a little problem again, right? If I select this color, because it's black and white, it's going to select anything that is that shade of color. Well, as you can see, we probably have a lot in here that it's going to pick, but that's okay because we'll deselect it. So we want to run with select color range. I'm going to again leave it on this first one, and I'm going to pick right up here in this corner until I get to where I see, you see how it creates a band that is just shifting. So this is where I'm going to have to click. And then now I'm going to have to add the plus option and just kind of click out to kind of get that corner, and just be cautious that I don't overkill. That's probably good right there. I'm going to say okay. Now we have dancing ants in a lot of areas that I don't want to modify. I don't want those. So again, I'm going to make sure up here I'm selected with a rectangle. And again, press and hold Alt on your keyboard. Don't let go of it. Just keep a hold of it. Draw a box around everything that you want to deselect. Continuing to hold Alt. You can click, drag at the top. And it did shift my image. So now I only have selected this top corner. Same thing, we're going to go back to Select, Select and Mask. And same thing, remember, we're going to feather, but if you watch, the feather sort of takes this line inward. To flatten it out, we want to smooth it, but again, you can see where we start and where I probably want to feather is about right here. But I need that to come out, so I'm going to shift my edges by moving it to the right until I get to the nebulosity itself, which is going to be right about there. You can see there's a line of nebulosity right here, and that I don't want to touch. So I'm going to say okay, and you can see it's got it selected. Now, because this is a monochrome image, we don't have to worry about blue, red, and green, but we're going to try doing this with just our curve stretch. Now, monochrome is different. If you pull this down, this makes it brighter. It's the exact inverse when it's monochrome. So we actually want to boost this area to darken it. Now, I like where it's at right here. So I'm going to say that that is good right there. I'm going to stop and I'm going to do Control D to deselect it. But I'm going to hit that area once again because over here on this right corner, you can see I sort of want to do it here as well. So I'm going to go Control J to give me another layer to work with down here in the bottom right. And I'm going to go back to Select, Color Range, and I'm going to click in that corner again. And what I'm going to do is click, and I'm going to click the plus again, and let's fill up this corner. And I'm just watching right here until it gets out to a point where I think that's good. So I think right about there is solid, and we have this top corner. So I'm gonna say okay, but we have a lot of dancing ants. Once again, select your marquee tool, rectangular marquee tool. Press and hold the Alt key and draw boxes around your perimeters. I'm gonna go down. I'm gonna come over to this corner and go down. And then I'm gonna come to the top and draw a box there. And now I can just get rid of the rest of these, almost the rest of those. And again, I never let go of Alt. I'm still holding it. Now you can let go. We go back to select and mask. Same thing. Feathered out quite a bit because we want it to be real nice and smooth. The feathering, what it does is, if you could imagine, each pixel is like a line that sticks up, right? They're all sort of like this, and there's just thousands of them. The feathering sort of brings them all together and makes it one smooth transition across, as opposed to these, crazy gradients. And, we can have one that's really bright and one that's really dark in the same area. So what it does is it kind of flattens it out and smooths it gradually and sort of does a gradient, but it's so smooth you don't really see that gradient line, as if we just draw a straight line and then this is light and this is dark, right? It really flattens it and smooths it and blends it really nicely. So we're gonna feather it out quite a bit, probably around 100 pixels, give or take. Yeah, about 60. But again, we have to boost it and push it out just a little ways. That's probably good there. We're only gonna go about halfway to where we were last time, because remember, up here in this corner, we already dimmed this down. We just care about the bright portion up here and the bright portion up here. And I might need to do a little bit more focusing on this corner. So that's probably pretty good there. We'll say okay, and we'll just see what happens. Control M will open up our curves, and once again, we have to boost. It's maybe too dark. Let's see. So this corner looks good. Let's see, I want to probably put it maybe right about here. And if you do it this way, it makes it too dark, I think. Yeah, we can try pulling that maybe a little bit more. Let's move this point. And a lot of this is just playing with it to get the feel. And I feel like that might be okay. So let me do deselect and look. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm not going to worry about the rest of this. That actually looks fairly decent. And I didn't really add any value, but I kind of took the focus off of those corners. And let's see what this gives us. So this is where we started, and this is where we're at, right? Super, super bright up in this corner. Middle looks way cleaner here. So we're going to right click and say flatten the image. That way we're working with one image over here. And I'm going to call that good for now. So I'm going to go File, Save As. We're going to call this H2, TIFF, and save. And then just say okay. So again, HA RGB, that's all we're working with. We're going to go back to PixInsight. We're going to go ahead and double click the background screen and open these up. So H2 and RGB2. So this image is incredibly noisy. I am going to go ahead and run SCNR and remove any of the green pixels. Then I am going to go ahead and go back to Russell Crowe Noise Exterminator, and I'm going to click, hold, drag and drop, and let that run. Okay, so now here's where the fun part is. We're going to go to Script. We're going to go to Utility. We're going to go to NB RGB combination, narrow band red blue or red green blue combination. So the first thing we want to do is we don't want any screen transfer function to apply. Why? Because we're not working with linear data. Remember in my previous videos, linear data, for those of you that always struggle to remember which one's which, linear data mean it's flatlined. Think of like a heart attack, right? The person's flatlined, it's linear, there's nothing there. But if we start stretching it, we start getting that histogram bump, just like a heartbeat, it's alive, right? We have color. Same thing here. So now what we want to do is look at our RGB source. So that's going to be RGB2. And the bandwidth, I just always bump this up to 200. I can't recall if that's inside of Warren Keller's book, if he says to do that or not, but I just always do that. So for narrowband, we're going to go pick H2 for hydrogen 2. I did shoot it with 3 nanometer filters. And we're gonna leave the scale at 1.2, and we're just gonna click this NB RGB button. Okay, so now we can take a look at our image, and we can see how it blended the hydrogen. Now let's try to boost the hydrogen and just see what it looks like if we go back to NB RGB. And I forgot to tell you, select this non-linear. Since we're not working with linear data, you want to say that it's not linear. It doesn't really change anything. Like if I click it without it, it adds a lot of color in there, maybe too much, but play around with it. You can see what comes up. So let's make this scale a little bit more and just see what happens. So it's not really adding much more. Tell you what, let's remove that and bring this down to maybe 1 and run it. It's not bad, I suppose. So once you find the image that makes you happy, all you have to do is say, okay. And your image is right here. Now to make it shorter, because I just don't want to mess with that, HARGB. All right, so we're working with a colored image. It does look incredibly noisy, and that's fine because we can still mess with some of the noise settings. We can make it darker, but once you add your stars in, like let me just show you what this will look like if I throw in the stars real quick. So we have HARGB plus RGB1 stars. So this is what we're sort of looking at right now if we were to say that this is done. And you don't really notice the noise as much once the stars are in. Again, full disclosure, this data was not perfect when I started, so it's definitely got some flaws to it. So it's not gonna be my best work, but I do want to demonstrate how do you clean some of this stuff up, which we have gone through. We can mess with some of this noise over here on the side. We can always come back to histogram transformation, do a preview, and I need to shrink that down. So you can come in here, you can actually pull this out a little bit to darken down your background. Right, we can do that and kind of make it more of an eerie feel to it, right? It's kind of coming out of nowhere. And just by that one little change, this is the preview, so let me close it. Right, we go from maybe too much to maybe a better feel. Right? Like that feels nicer right here. Yeah, I like that. Especially when you zoom back, right? You do see some of that. So we can go clean some of that up. So let's try to do that, right? How do we salvage some data? Well, let's go do it. So I find that this is where Photoshop excels. You can do so much more with limited points of space than you can inside of PixInsight easily. You can do most of these same functions within PixInsight, but it's just, there's so many more steps and it's just not as easy. So the first thing I'm gonna do is say Control J, because I want to work with another image, right? Each layer allows you to do something different, but you can always click back and go to your primary image. So the first thing I want to do is make sure I'm on layer 1. I'm gonna go to, let's go to curves. So it's Control M on the keyboard or Command M. And we have a lot of blue over here, so let's bring down our blue a little bit. Right, bring that down. Look at that, that looks nice. And then let's make sure our green's not in there, right? We can mess with that a little bit. If we pull it down, it kind of adds a purplish tone to it. But we only care right now about these corners, so we're also going to pull down this red. Right, pull all that red out. So before and after, before and after. Now you may be thinking, well, wait, how do we keep our core? Because we've lost so much in just our core. That's where this gets fun. All I have to do is click mask, which is down here. I'm going to go Control I to invert the mask. And then I'm going to go over here to the paintbrush. Make it a little bit bigger. Our flow, we're just going to max them out. We're just going to paint in where we wanted to remove those artifacts, basically, right? Just right here on these corners. That's it. That's what we shot for. We can come back over here and click inside here, and we can go to Control L to bring up our levels adjustment. Maybe we want to darken up that just a little bit more. See the difference here? And I'm only doing it where I'm masked with the paintbrush. That's basically my easy way of creating a mask. You know, maybe we want to pull it down to maybe right there. So before and after, before and after. And we haven't altered any of our actual data, which is this stuff here. We've just kind of darkened our background to try to remove some of the unpleasantries of the image itself. And, you know, if you're like me, this is going to be the type of image that you're more or less going to be working with more times than not. Something that, you know, people call it doctoring it up. And that's basically what you're doing. You're trying to preserve your details by removing, you know, your garbage, so to speak. So I like that. That's fine. And at the end of the day, this is your image. Do it however you want. So this looks better to me, though. The next thing I'm going to do, and the next thing that I think works better, is coloring. I think colors are way easier to control and to modify and to make pretty inside of Photoshop as opposed to PixInsight. And if I'm not mistaken, Adam Block actually did a deal on the Astro Imaging channel where he showed that the masks that are inside of PixInsight don't properly correspond to the color you're anticipating to be changed. So head over to the Astro Imaging channel to also check out that video where Adam Block went through the color wheel and how the formulas might be incorrect inside of PixInsight. So go check it out for yourself, though. I still personally prefer coloring inside of here. So I'm going to go Control J to give me another layer, and I'm just going to go up here to Hue and Saturation, and I'm going to go to just the red color, and let's see what happens. Right, that's obviously way too much. I want to boost it a little bit, but I also want to lighten it. Right, I want to bring out some of that fainter hydrogen, or you could dim it down, but I want to bring it up just a little, not a lot. But I also want to keep intact kind of that red feel. But then the same thing, the blues is where we're going to get that kind of purplish feel. So I want to see, you can tell where our blue is because if we overdo it, obviously there. So we're going to boost it maybe by just 2, just a little tiny boost, nothing crazy. So we're going to right click and say merge down and do another. We're going to go selective color with the reds. We're going to pull out the blue. We're going to boost our magenta just a little bit. And pull out some of our yellow, just a little. Kind of give it a little bit of a pink feel because that's what we're going for, right? A RGB image. Hydrogen is going to be more of this reddish pink color, obviously more on the red spectrum than the pink, but it can, because of the mixtures of blue, have a little bit more of a pink feel to it. And then we can just mess around with these settings. Obviously this is kind of too much, and that's way too much. And again, this is just feel. There's no number set that's always going to give you the same result. So this looks fine, but I think I want to add maybe a little bit more red saturation back here. So we're going to do that. And this way we kind of keep it more red than pink, but you can see there's hints of red within that. And then I'm going to right click and say flatten image, because that's all I'm going to do. Nothing crazy. And we're going to send this back to PixInsight. So I'm going to close that image because I no longer need it. I'm going to close our RGB image because I no longer need it. And, you know, I would usually tell you to just minimize these, and that's probably what I should be doing. But so here's our image. You know, I'm pretty content with that. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, RGB 2. And you know what? First of all, what I might try to do, let's go up here to Script, Utilities, and we're going to go to Dark Structure Enhance. Let's change the amount to maybe only 30%, right? 0.3 is 30%, and say OK. This will just kind of help give us a little more contrast within these dark areas. Not everything will benefit from this, but some things will, like before and after. You see how it kind of just darkens up a little bit in here and then a little bit in here. Yeah, that's probably fine. Nothing crazy. Another thing we can do is we can come up here and say extract CIEL component, or a luminance layer, if you will. Click, hold, and drag that over here to apply the mask. Right click and say mask, show mask. We're going to go to local histogram equalization. I'm going to boost this up to 300. I'm going to pull our amount down to maybe 40%. Click, hold, drag and drop. This does take a little bit to run, so we'll be back as soon as it's done. Okay, now that that is done, let's see what it did before and after. You see how it kind of just like lightens up some of our highlights and just adds a little more contrast to the general image. That's fine too. Let's minimize that. Let's click on our mask. I don't need this mask anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and close it. So now that we're at this point, we have an RGB image. Let's go ahead and throw our stars back in and wrap up this processing. So the way we're going to do that is go to Pixel Math. We have our image, RGB2 plus RGB stars 1, because I want my RGB stars. I don't want my luminance stars or my hydrogen stars. These will both be just monochrome data. I want to make sure I put in my colored RGB stars back in. Just click the square. It'll place them right back in. And here we are with our final image. Now, this is where a lot of people would probably stop, right? This is all we want to do. But that's not where we're going to stop. Russell Croman also has a new process that he just released, which is going to be all processes. And you can try this out with, it's either like a 2-week or a 30-day trial. But it's going to be Blur Exterminator. So we have it selected. Now, I did watch a video where Warren Keller and company indicated that it could work best to say correct first, which if you just hover over this, it will correct the image first, followed by sharpening. So it'll correct for motion blur, astigmatisms and such, and then coma, all of that stuff, and then it will go ahead and sharpen the image. So I do find that I select this and it does a pretty good job. So click, hold, drag and drop. Now this process does take a few minutes to run, so we'll be back as soon as it's done. Okay, so now that it's done, let's check out our before and after. Before and after. The stars look so much better when they're nice and small and tight, and keeps the focus on your actual image above all else. Just put that up there. So yeah, before and after, you know, I really like it. Some of those faint stars are cool, like if you zoom in, you know, with that RC8, it gets a lot of great details with faint stars that are far away. It truly does. But we also aren't making those the focus of our image. We don't really care about the stars themselves. We care about the nebulosity. So in this image, you can see the image looks fairly decent, right? There is a level of noise to it, but it's nothing that's going to be too crazy, right? A lot of these images that you take from city lights are going to have a level of noise inherent to the image itself, and there's really not a lot you can do about it other than just take more images, which I'm personally just going to call this one done. I'm content with it. And at this point, those are some of the new techniques, especially with Russell Croman's new Blur Exterminator. As you can see, it reduced our stars quite a bit, and it's going to enhance your details a little bit. Like if you watch right up here, it does remove some of the blur, and it gives you a little bit better contrast of the details within your nebulosity. Now, remember, garbage in, garbage out. His tool is only going to be as good as your data is. If you just have a little bit of blur, it can definitely help. Where I've seen a lot of assistance with that particular program is on galaxies. And to best demonstrate that, I've just opened up an old image of M74 that I had done last year. Now you can see it's actually got a good amount of details for taken from my backyard, right? Like it's no observatory grade, but it does have a level of blur to it. But as soon as you run Blur Exterminator, which I've already done, and I'm just going to show you the before and after, like you can see the dust lanes are better enhanced. It's truly sharpened my image. It gives you a little bit more details inside of this galaxy, and it defines your data just a little bit more. But again, garbage in, garbage out, not the best image, but it did its best to really help it. When you zoom out, you can see that little bit of assistance as well. It's definitely worth its money with the stars. I love how it really pinpoints those stars. It fixes your stars as well. especially if you have any level of coma. It definitely assists with that. You can actually see up here in this corner star, for example, like right here. After running it, it's much tighter. It still has coma, but it's reduced so much that when you zoom out, you don't even notice it. So I will leave you guys with that. Thank you so much for joining today. If you have questions, put those in the comments below. Otherwise, clear skies and have a great day, and we'll see you next time.